Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. My name is Steve Fielding. These stories are taken from my 3-volume series of books, The Hangman's Record, covering every execution in Great Britain and Ireland between 1868 and 1964. Copies of these, and many of my other titles, can be obtained through my website, stevefielding.com. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe and press like to help us reach a wider audience. If you can spare £1 or £2 to help the channel to continue to grow, donations can be made by clicking the thanks button below the video or in the link paypal.me/thehangmansrecord. As always, use the comments below for thoughts on the case, whether justice was seen to be done, and suggestions for future episodes in the series are always welcomed. Today's tale from the Hangman's Record takes us back to January 1959. Queen Elizabeth II is into the 7th year of her reign, Conservative Harold Macmillan is the Prime Minister, and future leader Margaret Thatcher enters the House of Commons as the MP for Finchley in North London. In America, 34th President Dwight D. Eisenhower is in the White House. The year would see the launch of the Austin Mini and the maiden hovercraft crossing of the English Channel. The first stretch of the M1 motorway opens, Barclays Bank becomes the first to install a computer, Great Britain and Iceland fight over the fishing rights in what became known as the Cod Wars, and British Empire Day is renamed Commonwealth Day. The year begins with Conway Twitty at number 1 in the UK charts with its Only Make Believe. American acts still dominate, but young British rock and rollers like Tommy Steele, Marty Wilde and Cliff Richard become popular as the skiffle craze, led by Lonnie Donegan, begins to fall out of favour. Across the Atlantic, tragedy strikes on February the 3rd, the day the music died, when a plane crash claimed the lives of Buddy Holly, Richie Valens and the Big Bopper. With ITV now rather than the BBC, popular television shows that year include Jukebox Jury, Oh Boy, the police drama No Hiding Place, and children's programmes Ivor the Engine, Noggin the Nog and Torture the Battery Boy. Alongside classics like Ben-Hur and Some Like It Hot, comedies, dramas and war film are popular at the cinema, although the emphasis of the latter was on more light-hearted movies like Operation Bullshine, Desert Mice and Idle on Parade, featuring pop singer Anthony Newley. With Elvis Presley having added movies to his singing career over in America, the UK quickly copied suit and saw the release of Tommy Steele's Tommy the Toreador and Cliff Richard in Espresso Bongo. In Great Britain, jobs were plentiful, with unemployment as low as 1% at times, and the era often described as the Golden Age due to low inflation and high productivity. Most people still shop locally at the butcher, greengrocer and corner shop. Supermarkets were rare, and although many households now owned a car, items like fridges, washing machines and televisions were seen as symbols of prosperity. Smoke hung heavy in the air from domestic coal fires and industrial chimneys. Thick pea-soup fogs and smog were still an occasional issue, but the Clean Air Act of 1956 would see a move away from the reliance on coal, the introduction of smokeless fuel, and more use of electrical and diesel power would see the phasing out of steam locomotives within a decade. And on the south coast of England, 2 murder cases, 2 weeks and 20 miles apart, had detectives from 2 forces searching for their brutal killers. Captain Charles Frederick Barrett had led a full and interesting life. Born in 1873, at the age of 17 he sailed to South Africa, where he studied at a missionary college until the Zulu uprising and outbreak of the Boer War caused him to abandon his studies and enlist into the British Army. Serving in the cavalry, he rose through the ranks, and when the Boer War ended in 1902, he returned to his homeland and settled in Maidstone, where, besides breeding horses, he became an accomplished amateur steeplechaser. When the Great War broke out in the summer of 1914, he rejoined the army, and amongst his military achievements, he was the railhead commander at Salonika before joining the newly formed Royal Flying Corps. Following the armistice, his travels took him to Ireland, where he ran a fishing hotel in Galway before he settled into retirement in Southampton. His home in the Portsmouth district of the city was filled with numerous souvenirs of his travels, with many items displayed on the walls in the lounge and hallway. Pride of place was a Zulu knobkerry, a hard wooden club made of teak, given to Barrett by the novelist H. Rider Haggard, with whom he had met in his youth out in South Africa. Now in his 85th year, in December 1958, he secured the services of a housekeeper to help with the running of the neat semi-detached house at 11 Belmont Road. The person appointed was 25-year-old Mary Theresa Tatum, who moved into the house along with her 24-year-old husband Michael and their 10-year-old daughter Yvonne. Captain Barrett occupied rooms on the ground and first floor, with tenant 36-year-old John Finn occupying another room and the Tatums sharing the other bedroom. London-born Michael Tatum was an unemployed cinema projectionist, and although out of work when his wife took the role as a housekeeper, within a short time he found a job in a local tyre manufacturer's. However, on Friday the 9th of January 1958, he lost his job, and when he returned to Belmont Road, he quarrelled with his wife to the extent that Tatum packed his bags and moved out, taking lodgings a few streets away on Cambridge Road. At 7 o'clock on Thursday evening, the 15th of January, John Finn left the house to go to work on the night shift as a painter at the local shipyard. Returning home at 7:30 on the following morning, he was surprised to find the front door open. This was unusual, as Captain Barrett was always sure to lock each exterior door before retiring to bed. Finn walked down the passageway and up the stairs, where he found the door to Captain Barrett's bedroom open. From inside he heard sounds of wheezing and groaning. The bedclothes were soaked in blood, and looking inside he discovered the battered unconscious body of Captain Barrett. A broken Zulu knobkerry, also blood-stained, lay under the bed. He alerted Mrs. Tatum and then rushed to telephone an ambulance and the police. Captain Barrett was taken to the Royal Southampton Hospital, where it was found he had sustained a badly fractured skull. He died on the following afternoon. Under the command of Inspector Edward Booth, the search for the killer did not take long. John Finn said he had been a lodger with Mr. Barrett for 5 years, and explained how he had found the captain lying beside the bed in his pyjamas, his head covered in blood, and there was blood on the pillow. He added that despite his age, the Boer War veteran was still fit and strong for his age. A post-mortem found that Captain Barrett had been struck 3 times and had died from the fractured skull. There was also evidence to strongly suggest that the killer was left-handed. Mrs. Tatum said she'd been asleep while the attack had taken place and told detectives she had heard nothing. It was soon established that robbery was clearly the motive for the killing. The back door was open but had not been forced, and the bureau in Captain Barrett's room had been ransacked. Captain Barrett's wallet, thought to contain around £10, was also missing. Also clearly visible was the outline on the wall from where the killer had removed the murder weapon. It was a brutal murder, but within 48 hours the inspector had the man in custody. Following an interview with Mrs. Tatum, they decided her husband needed to be interviewed. There was no break-in, and they knew Michael Tatum had keys to the house. He also knew John Finn would be at work at night, and most significantly, they learned that he was also left-handed. On Sunday, January the 28th, Michael Tatum was interviewed by Detective Inspector Masters of the Southampton CID at his lodgings on Cambridge Road and denied owning anything about the murder. Asked about his movements on Thursday night, Tatum said he had visited a number of pubs with a friend called Derek. Not satisfied with the story, Masters arrested Tatum, and when he searched his wallet it was found to contain 7 £1 notes, which he claimed his friend had given to him. Under questioning, he finally made a statement admitting playing a part in the murder. Tatum said he and another man had entered the house to rob the old man and went into the front room where he looked in the desk. The other chap had a pencil torch, he said. We went upstairs and I looked around and I saw he had taken a stick from the wall. We went into the captain's room. I picked up his wallet from a table by the bed. The captain sat up and I was scared and went towards the door. The other chap hit him with the stick and we ran out. We shared the money down the road. I will tell the truth, it was really my fault. Tatum was then remanded in custody pending a murder trial at the next assizes. Following a number of high-profile murder cases in the early 1950s, in which the press and general public felt that the death penalty was proving to be inconsistent and in need of a review, the government decided to hold an inquiry, and as a result, in 1957, they passed the Homicide Act, which categorised murder into capital and non-capital. Michael Tatum had been charged with murder during the furtherance of theft, and was to be tried with capital murder, and would face the gallows if convicted. The trial opened on Thursday the 19th of March at Hampshire Assizes, Winchester, before Mr Justice Cassells and a jury that included 3 women. It was to last 4 days. The veteran judge, who had been promoted to the bench just before the start of the Second World War, would celebrate his 82nd birthday during the trial. Norman Scallon QC led for the Crown, while Tatum was represented by Edgar Stewart Fair QC. Scallon outlined the case by stating that Captain Barrett had been struck 3 times with the wooden Zulu club and had died of a fractured skull. Tatum had admitted the theft of Barrett's wallet. Evidence also suggested that the murder weapon had been wielded by a left-handed killer and Michael Tatum was left-handed. Scallon told the court that following a domestic dispute, the accused had left Belmont Road on Friday, January the 9th. His wife remained as the old man's housekeeper. Defence counsel Fair told the court that Tatum's defence was twofold. First, the accused, whilst not denying his involvement in the murder, claimed he had played no part in the violence inflicted on the old man, which had been carried out by his accomplice. Therefore, they were offering a defence of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. A doctor called by the defence told the court that Tatum was an incipient schizophrenic. They also claimed he was a compulsive liar and lived in a fantasy world. At various times he had boasted to being an officer in the Australian Navy, a police officer, and even invented stories of sporting achievements and trophies he'd won at various events. On one occasion, he'd even told the boss at work that his wife had died and shocked colleagues and organised a collection for a wreath. They were then stunned when she turned up alive and well at the workplace. A doctor called by the prosecution stated that while Tatum was abnormal, it did not impair his mental responsibility. Throughout the trial, Scallon told the court everything Tatum would say was lies, as he was a pathological liar. The Crown called Tatum's alleged accomplice Terry Thatcher, who told the court he had never heard of Michael Tatum before being questioned by the police. He said he had never even been to Belmont Road in Southampton. Scallon said that proved there was no one else involved and that Tatum alone had murdered Captain Barrett when he had been interrupted during the course of burglary. When it was his turn to address the court, Mr Fair said Tatum's initial statement to the police was accurate and would be used as his defence. You have seen the statement which Tatum made to the police admitting he was in the bedroom stealing when this unfortunate man was struck. You have also seen his statement that he was not alone, that it was not he who held the knobkerry, but a man he casually met called Terry Thatcher. That is not the man called by the prosecution. That is what the accused says happened and what I am going to call him into the witness box to say. What he is going to say is that he had not the slightest intention of violence, which was in the mind of Terry Thatcher when he went on this foolish criminal expedition into the house. A Scotland Yard scientist was called to say that although blood had been found on the knobkerry, he found none on Tatum's clothing, except on a pair of gloves, but these particles were so small he could not tell if they were human or animal. He also said that the knobkerry could be easily lifted and used as a murder weapon. Fair said the most Tatum was guilty of was burglary. But, he said, if the jury believed Tatum knew Thatcher might offer violence to the degree that grievous bodily harm was Thatcher's intention, then the accused would be guilty of murder but not guilty of capital murder, since Tatum did not strike the victim. Fair outlined the second defence, claiming Tatum's mental state was such that if the jury believed he had killed Captain Barrett, they should say it was manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He called psychiatrist Dr Isaac Aitken from the Park Pruitt Hospital in Basingstoke, who claimed Tatum was a schizophrenic. Tatum began fantasising and telling lies without any real purpose, and would by implication be acting under the influence of diminished responsibility. He admitted that when he examined Tatum, he believed the accused understood the gravity of the crime but was not upset by it. Dr. Aitken also said Tatum was a violent man who, if he carried a weapon, would unquestionably use it. When asked by the judge if Tatum was insane, Dr. Aitken replied he was perfectly sane, but that was not diminished responsibility. The chief medical officer at Winchester prison agreed Tatum was not suffering any diminished responsibility, although he was a psychopath. In the witness box, Tatum said he had left school in 1950, had married at Hammersmith in March 1957, and moved to Southampton from London in the following year. The couple had moved into Mr. Barrett's in December 1958. On January the 9th, he lost his job, and he and his wife had an argument, causing him to move out and take lodgings close by. On the following Thursday, he returned to the house with Thatcher to rob Captain Barrett. "My financial position was very bad, and I yielded to temptation," he confessed, adding that when he and Thatcher entered the house, he had no idea what was going through Thatcher's mind except for robbery. After Tatum had put Barrett's wallet in his jacket, the old man stirred, so Tatum ran to the door but heard Thatcher striking the old man with the knobkerrie he had picked up downstairs. After hitting the old man, the pair ran as fast as they could down the street. Summing up, Gallows submitted the story of Thatcher was pure fantasy, and that Tatum alone was responsible for the murder, and that he was not suffering from diminished responsibility. Asked to consider their verdict, the jury retired for just 40 minutes to find him guilty of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. His appeal before the Lord Chief Justice Parker and Mr. Justice Donovan and Salmon was dismissed on Monday, April 27th. On Wednesday, May the 13th, he was visited for the last time by his wife and baby daughter Yvonne. Separated by the toughened glass partition, Tatum heard his daughter say the only word she knew at that age, "Dada." The tearful meeting lasted an hour before the condemned man was returned to his cell and his tearful wife escorted from the prison. Michael Tatum was hanged at Winchester Prison on the following morning by Les Stewart and assistant Tommy Cunliffe. He was the 11th man to be hanged following the passing of the Homicide Act, and it was the third carried out by Jock Stewart as the chief executioner. By coincidence, it was also Thomas Cunliffe's third execution as an assistant. Unlike the hanging of police killer Ronald Merwood at Pentonville 8 days earlier, which had attracted massive demonstrations with police on horseback breaking up rioting protesters outside the jail, Michael Tatum's execution was quite the opposite. Newspapers reported that a solitary man approached the prison gates as the hour approached, removing his cap, clutching a rosary and standing in silence as the clock chimed to signify that Captain Barrett had been avenged. It was Monday afternoon, the 2nd of February 1959, when Roselle Bennett called at 5 Western Parade, South Sea, Portsmouth, on the south coast of England, to pay her weekly rent money. There was no answer from the landlord, 66-year-old Herbert William Mullins, so she pushed against the door and found it unlocked. As she stepped inside, she immediately noticed blood on the floor, and the large radio standing beside the bed was also splattered with blood. On the bed was a number of items as if someone had been rummaging for something, but clearly out of place was a large porcelain sink resting on the blood-stained bedding. Something was clearly awry, and dashing outside she went in search of a policeman. When an officer returned to the house, he found the battered body of the old man lying in a heap on the floor beside the bed. Under the command of Detective Superintendent Harry Payne, a murder investigation was set up. They learned that the victim was a former estate agent turned hotel owner and antique dealer running a shop at 23 Kent Road, just 50 or so yards from the hotel, and who was known locally as Old Pandora. Thought to be a rich eccentric, he was a well-known and imposing figure, standing over 6 foot tall. Stocky and shabbily dressed, always sporting a trilby hat, he would sit outside his shop on the pavement, waiting for the occasional customer to wander through the array of bric-a-brac, mostly covered in layers of dust. Born in nearby Alverstoke in 1892, Herbert Mullins lived in and rented out rooms in the Seagull Hotel on Western Parade, one of a number of properties in the area that he owned. As well as owning the hotel and shop, Mullins had a reputation of being involved with drugs, money laundering, violence and prostitution, and of taking advantage of female tenants down on their luck, often offering payment in kind if they fell behind with their rent. He had moved to Kent Road after the Second World War. When officers made a search of the shop, they were shocked that old Pandora, who seemed to spend his life in there, actually made any money. They learned he had been in court a number of times for a variety of offences, ranging from traffic convictions, issues with property, overcharging of rent, quarrelling with other estate agents, and living off the earnings of prostitutes. They also discovered that he had been married 5 times. The first in 1915 at the age of 23, while serving as a corporal in the Royal Merchant in Lancaster Yeomanry, was to Annie Hartley, a 23-year-old housemaid. They had a daughter Elsie in December of the following year. By the mid-20s, had divorced, with Annie remarrying in 1925. Mullins' second marriage in 1928 was to 19-year-old Marjorie Wilde. This ended in 1930 when she divorced him for adultery. In 1935, he married Mavis Buckley, and in 1946, the now 53-year-old Mullins married another 19-year-old, Doris Jacobs. Finally, in 1949, he married his last 19-year-old, chorus girl and model Joyce Walker. They separated soon afterwards, but remained married, and following his death, despite not seeing him for many years, she inherited his estate, valued at around £150,000 in 2025, after all the outstanding mortgages and debts had been settled. Joyce and her new husband-to-be, Ivan Vickery, were among the small group of mourners at Mullins' funeral on the following Friday at Kingston Cemetery. Also present was his sister and daughter Elsie. At the murder scene, Detective Superintendent Payne noted that the body of Herbert Mullins was lying between the bed and sideboard, and on the bed was the bloodstained wash basin. A post-mortem carried out by Home Office pathologist Dr. Keith Simpson revealed that the murder weapon was the porcelain wash basin, weighing over 17 pounds, but that the victim had been partially strangled before had been attacked with the sink. Simpson also confirmed the local police surgeon's findings that Mullins had died between 4 and 8 o'clock on the Sunday evening. Detectives interviewed a number of witnesses, including a local shopkeeper, who said that Mullins always carried around £25 in cash and was even known to carry gold. Another told the police that old Pandora had more enemies than friends. Mullins was a solitary and lonely man. He had no one to cook or clean for him and would barely converse with his tenants other than to collect their rent. They did discover that staff at the local library knew Mullins well, mainly because, being hard of hearing, he spoke in a loud, deep, booming voice and was fond of reading true crime books. One other bit of information that came to their attention was that a young man had been seen hanging around the shop on Sunday afternoon. Just as the murder of old Pandora had been discovered, a young sailor was already in custody in connection with a break-in at a shop in Fratton Road, which had yielded a haul of 6 watches, valued at almost £12. He was also charged with theft of money from a meter in a property on Elphinstone Road in Southsea. The sailor was a 21-year-old naval rating steward on the flagship HMS Tyne, stationed at the dockyard in Portsmouth. On Monday afternoon, David Lancelot de Duca, who hailed from Darlington, County Durham, the northeast of England, appeared before Portsmouth magistrates and was remanded in custody. The arresting officer at the time, unaware of the murder of old Pandora, noted that the man had a spot of blood on his coat. With de Duca in custody and the police inquiries continued, word reached them that on Sunday lunchtime a drunken sailor had been asking about Mullins and where he lived. 24 hours after the funeral of old Pandora, the police announced they were holding a man in connection with the murder, but all they would say was their inquiries had centred on the naval dockyards in Portsmouth. The breakthrough came when fingerprints found on the wash basin were found to match those of the detained man. Placing an ID parade at Cosham Police Station, a number of witnesses picked de Duca out as the man they had seen loitering in Western Parade on Sunday afternoon. Under questioning, he soon admitted the murder, but stressed that the old man had attacked him first, and he had picked up the heavy wash basin striking Mullins on the head 2 or 3 times after they had fallen onto the bed. Despite his age, Mullins was a strong man, weighing 20 stone and standing over 6 foot tall. While the Duca was being interviewed, word came back from the forensic science laboratory that the blood on his clothes was the same group as that of Mullins. He made another statement that he had gone to the old man's room to see if he could rent a room in Western Parade. The plan was that the Duca and a friend would rent the room until their ship left Portsmouth in early February. However, by the middle of January 1959, they had run out of money and had left the rooms. The Duca said that on Sunday the 1st of February, he and 3 other sailors met up in the Ship and Castle Hotel for a lunchtime drink. They stayed drinking scrumpy until 2 o'clock, by which time the Duca was very drunk. He said the conversation had turned to money, and he mentioned old Pandora, and that he would carry large amounts of cash on him day or night. The Duca said Mullins was deaf, wore glasses, and would be an easy touch. One of the sailors said he wanted no part in the robbery and left the pub. Having found that Mullins was still living in the same room on Western Parade, the trio made their way there. According to the Duca, they were all very drunk when they arrived, but couldn't find their way in. The other 2 then decided to return to the ship, and the Duca, who claimed it was the most drunk he'd ever been, then walked to Elphinstone Road, where he stole a sum of money. The Duca admitted entering the hotel on Western Parade that his intention was to steal. He said the old man came into the room and grabbed him. They struggled, and although no punches were thrown, they fell onto the bed. The Duca said that when Mullins was trying to get up, he picked up the wash basin and dropped it down onto his head. He denied going through the dead man's pockets, saying that the money stolen, £44, had been on the table in the room and he'd already put it in his pocket before the old man had entered. The Duca then alleged, "I filled in the bloke and took his money." This confession, not just to murder but to capital murder, would see him face the gallows at Winchester, where another Hampshire murderer, Michael Tatum, convicted of a similar crime, was awaiting his date with the hangman. On Wednesday, April the 8th, David the Duca appeared before Mr Justice Cassels at the Hampshire Assizes in Winchester. He was charged with capital murder committed in the furtherance of theft. The Crown was represented by Mr Justice Maloney QC, while the Duca was represented by David Croom Johnson QC. His counsel offered 3 defences. First, that he had acted in self-defence, fearing Mullins would either kill him or cause serious harm, and he was therefore not guilty of any crime. Secondly, if he did not act in self-defence, the actions of Herbert Mullins amounted to provocation, and therefore the Duca should be charged with manslaughter and not murder. And thirdly, the Duca had drunk so much strong cider that his mental state was so abnormal that he could not control himself, and his actions amounted to diminished responsibility. And again, this was manslaughter and not murder. The 4-day trial began with Maloney telling the court that this was a straightforward case of murder, done for the purposes of robbery, and all this talk of the Duca being frightened was nonsense. Dismissing any suggestion of manslaughter, Maloney asked the jury to consider that no reasonable man would say that Mullins had provoked the Duca, adding that grabbing a thief in your own home does not amount to provocation. Maloney said that the Crown would say that the Duca had attacked Mullins when he was lying on the bed reading a Sunday newspaper. He said the old man was not wearing his hearing aid and claimed that the Duca was lying when he said there was no one in the room when he entered. On the question of mental abnormality caused by too much drink, whilst in law this could amount to manslaughter, the law did not allow a drunken man to use this as an excuse for his actions. He told the jury that the effects of alcohol would have to be so extreme as to cause an illness recognised by experts as a mental illness. On April the 13th, the 4th day of the trial, the jury of 10 men and 2 women retired. After 90 minutes, they fell back into court to ask the judge for further guidance on the issue of diminished responsibility and alcohol. A note was handed to the judge asking that if a man's mind was impaired by alcohol, would that reduce the charge from murder to manslaughter? Mr Justice Cassells directed them that the alcohol must have substantially impaired the man's actions to such a point that he had no longer any control over what he was doing. It was no defence for him to say alcohol affected his reasoning. 5 minutes later, the jury returned with a verdict. They found David Duca guilty of murder, but wished to add a recommendation for mercy. The prisoner sat with his head bowed as he was sentenced to be hanged by the neck. He was taken back to Winchester jail, where he occupied the adjacent condemned cell, currently housing Michael Tatum, awaiting his appeal. A date of Tuesday the 5th of May was fixed, and hangman Les Stewart and an assistant were engaged. 2 weeks later, Michael Tatum's appeal was rejected, and his execution date was set for May the 14th, 2 weeks before David Duca's appeal was due to be heard in London. Tatum was hanged before Duca was taken from the jail and escorted to London on Thursday the 26th of May to appear before Lord Chief Justice Parker and Mr Justice Finnemore and Justice Wynne. At the appeal, the defence argued that the trial judge had not directed the jury correctly on the malice required for murder during a struggle, and that intoxication, beyond being drunk, could be enough for the killing to be manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Duca's legal team argued that the trial judge was wrong to say that a burglar could be legally attacked and hurt by a householder, and secondly, that the judge had not explained the new laws of diminished responsibility properly to the jury. On the first point, the appeal judges said that Mr Justice Cassells was merely talking about the motive for the crime, and had later said that if Duca reasonably thought he would be killed or seriously harmed, then even as a thief he was entitled to defend himself. That part of the appeal accordingly failed. It was on the second point, that of drunkenness and diminished responsibility, the three judges agreed that the judge had not directed the jury properly. They said Mr Justice Cassells had told them the law of murder and simple drunkenness, rather than the question of drunkenness and diminished responsibility. However, the judges themselves decided that even a toxic mix of alcohol could not amount to diminished responsibility. Dismissing the appeal, Lord Chief Justice Parker noted, "In our judgment, there was no evidence of an abnormality of the mind. It is doubted whether the transient effects of alcohol, even if it produces a toxic effect on the brain, would bring the accused into the rules of diminished responsibility." David Duca was returned to the death cell in Winchester, and a new date for execution was set for Thursday, the 11th of June. Following the failure of the appeal, Duca's local Labour MP, Mr Arthur Palmer, launched a campaign to save his constituent from the gallows, based on the jury's recommendation for mercy. A petition was sent to the House of Commons, but it seemed a forlorn hope, considering the similarities with the Tatum case, who executioner Stewart had hanged just 28 days earlier. Then, on Monday evening, a little over 2 days before his scheduled execution, news came through that David Duca had been reprieved. With no reason publicly announced, it seemed the Home Office had taken into consideration the recommendation for mercy to saving him from the hangman's rope. David Lancelot Duca was released from prison in March 1976 after serving 17 years and relocated to the Bristol area, where he married in the following year. I believe David Duca was very lucky to escape the gallows, especially as Michael Tatum had paid the ultimate penalty just a few weeks earlier on the same scaffold. The effects of alcohol would see numerous killers go to the gallows over the years, with drunkenness never really being accepted as justification for committing murder, so he was very fortunate indeed that that seems to have helped secure his reprieve. Michael Tatum became the 11th man to be executed following the passing of the Homicide Act, and like 8 of his predecessors, the capital conviction was due to murder committed in the furtherance of theft. Although one could feel a certain amount of sadness reading of the final visit by his wife and young daughter, seeing her dada for the last time, it was a brutal and callous murder, and, as seen by the lack of any public outcry or campaign for reprieve, garnered little sympathy from almost anyone, with perhaps the exception of his young family and the lone sympathiser at the prison gates. But was Michael Tatum's crime any different from that of the murder of old Pandora? And why should one man live and another die for near identical crimes? Another example of the inconsistencies of the Homicide Act that would help speed up the abolition of the death penalty a decade later. You'll be watching another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, thank you and goodbye.